which is this new Jordanian answer to Al-Azhar. It's a university in the desert with 4,000 students, almost all of whom come from non-Arab Muslim countries. So that the languages of instruction are Urdu, Malaysian, Indonesian, Turkish, Farsi. It's absolutely fascinating. And look what they're trying to do. These are the objectives. Most of them are women, incidentally. They had 100 Bosnian women Muslims last year, but they had to send them home because they were too disruptive. But what does this place say? To form a rounded Muslim personality which is attuned to his or her environment and to the civilization of the modern world by combining and harmonizing modern scientific knowledge and methodology in teaching and research on the one hand, the requirements of belief and clarity of vision on the other. To acquaint the Muslim not only with his or her own culture but with numerous cultures of the world in order that he or she may place his or her culture in the context of different cultures and identify the role he or she may play to enrich modern civilization with elements derived from his or her own culture. To activate Muslim participation in all fields of modern life without any debilitating sense of alienation or isolation. To strengthen the Muslim's ability to communicate with other people in an atmosphere of tolerance and friendliness. To deepen the values of freedom of thought and expression and of tolerance and coexistence based on dialogue and mutual understanding. To encourage a spirit of open-mindedness and tolerance and to present the true image of Islam as a way of life that does not seek to impose itself on others. To purify Islam of all secret intentions entertained by individuals or groups and of attempts of achieving sectarian, factional, or individual advantage. To teach Islam through persuasion and understanding, not preaching and proselytizing. This is quite an experiment. We spent a week in the desert with all kinds of conversations, so you can see that there is a ferment and a kind of change taking place. Now there's some special Hashemite interest in all this, as you can see by Al-Bayt as a title, but there's a lot going on. I guess I just wanted, with a captive audience here, because we were all struck by the nature of that philosophical statement.
Sure. Professor Ziegler, in the lecture you mentioned the growing intolerance or hostility toward other religious minorities, namely Christian and Jews in the Middle East, and the Islamic Middle East. I wonder what would be your opinion, but I believe those are not the norm and more or less incident, because those minorities have always been a very welcomed part of the bigger minority throughout the Ottoman Empire, the left systems, and even later on under different secular regimes. Even those incidents or small periods of intolerance toward Christian and Jews in the Middle East, won't you agree with me that it probably is the result of a move toward a discriminatory, pretty much a culture that discriminates, pretty much inclusive, a pre-Islamic culture, a rooted, deeply rooted Arabian culture?
So this is why I read this. There's an intense debate going on as to what is the nature of the understanding of Islam. Not so much by the major voices, because these are enormously important Muslim theologians, but in terms of the practice in the Islamist movement, that in many ways these are not a reading of mainstream Muslim theology. And that's what they're saying here, that the Islamists are not very knowledgeable of their own religion. It's the same quarrel I have with the fundamentalist in Christianity. Even though they can quote everything at you, you see, their answer is always a text, not a discussion of the meaning in a larger historical sense of a very complex theology. And I think that's the kind of discussion and debate that, you know, is being deepened in these debates. You can see my hesitation as a political scientist. I don't much like the state, okay? So I'm having What is the state? It's the institution that has a monopoly on killing people. This really what you want? You want to be the end of religion is to control coercive instruments of the state. I have a problem with that.
Okay, go ahead.
Now we have Professor Ziegler in front of us. May I ask a question that is timely but not necessarily related?
Sure.
Thank you. What value?
It's better to be timely.
What value do you give to the most recent two developments in the Middle East? Namely the Palestine National Council amendment of the Charter and the Israeli Labour Party accepting the Palestinian statehood towards the peace process development in the region.
Well, having just spent 2 weeks in the area, I didn't encounter anyone who would even permit, and this is 100 Arab intellectuals out in the desert, and from all over the Arab world, I didn't encounter a single one who will even permit the use of the phrase peace process. You cannot believe the depth of pessimism that now characterizes the sense of what's happening. Having said that, how do you account for what happened in Gaza? Well, very realistically, you had Arafat telling them, on the one hand, this is all they want to give us, zones A, B, and C. And the only way we can keep the process going is not handing them the victory of which they want, of saying it wasn't us who stopped the peace process, it was the PLO. And so, therefore, Arafat never justifies these agreements. He never defends them. He just simply always says, what other alternative have we got? Therefore, you make the most out of what you can get. And his argument is, if we want to get a Palestinian state, we have to go ahead with this. But, we're certainly not done with any enthusiasm. And you got the response from the Labour Party. Now, we've had 4 months of secret negotiations. That's the other part that wasn't in Norman Finkelstein's presentation, and I'm not sure he's aware of that. They've all been leaked in the Israeli press. They don't exist anywhere in the Western press. That we've had 4 months of secret negotiations between the Labour government and the PLO, dealing with all elements of a comprehensive settlement. And they do include the notion of a Palestinian state. Okay, what kind of Palestinian state is it? Well, it doesn't include most of the border areas and Greater Jerusalem, all of which get annexed to Israel, and that includes 70% of the settlements. Okay, but there is an agreement on a state. Not that, and the Israelis remain for 12 years along the Jordan River. A Palestinian state will be established with Al-Quds. A new Al-Quds will be created as its capital. But what is it? It's putting together all of the Arab neighborhoods outside the boundaries, starting with Abu Dis. But it's now called something new, all put together. In fact, the size of it, Al-Quds, will be almost equal to the population, the Jewish population of West and East Jerusalem. Now, and beyond that, even in the details that continue it, the Palestinian state will be given extraterritorial authority over Haram al-Sharif and also over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, in a way, something is happening here, and he's simply saying, look, that's better than anything else if we continue the momentum. Now, he also told them all, sign up and you'll have a nice job with the Palestinian Authority. There's a lot of this going on, and particularly when no one has a job, that's a great thing to offer.
2 more questions after the one in the front. There is 2 more. One at the back. Okay, you're the last one. Go ahead.
Okay, Professor Ziegler, I'm just trying to get some clarity on this idea of political Islam in a struggle with, with secularism. I was just wondering, as a concept or an idea, is it possible that secularism creates an innocence for itself by rising above the direct battle and somehow employing religion to fight religion. I'm just looking at the case of India, like it's supposed to be a secular country, but the truth is a lot of our politicians are not. I mean, religion does play a big part in, the BJP and other, somehow, the fact that these parties have come up in society and have gained such prominence, which with a fundamental religious background, and they engage in, like the Babri Masjid incident, which was incited by them, and the Indian government pretty much, washed their hands of the direct responsibility and the shame of allowing something like that happen. So I was just wondering, what is the status of political Islam in a country like India, which does not necessarily practice Western secularism, as opposed to what you were just talking about with the United States and Western countries?
But the example holds. A substantial proportion of the U.S. population is not secular, not at all. And so it's a particular meaning in the Indian case that was decided because of the deep divisions. Indonesia does the same thing, but it's not secularism in the thing that's been promoted by this consumer culture stuff, or even by many of my social science colleagues who believe that religion is the greatest obstacle to progress. That isn't the philosophy of Indonesia or India when you're dealing with multi-religious groups. And I guess what I'm saying, let me come back very much to my meaning that historically there has been a civil society in the Muslim world. And it was very much the ulama in a kind of network of institutions which were not the state, but which were intermediary between the family and the guild. This is not foreign to Muslim practice, that religion can in fact play that kind of intermediary between the state and the individual and the group to make sure that the state conforms to the requirements of justice. That's what the whole essence of this... now, if you take the state and then impose something on everyone, rather than this element of a shared religious identity and community, then I think you undermine it. But it's a subtle point, because I'm really arguing that one of the deep problems of so-called Western modernity is it lost its Abrahamic foundations. It's only the Greek secular inheritance. And so what was the meaning of that? And there's a huge debate on, trying to recover much of that kind of sense of justice and obligation. That's why I read out that statement of the world religions, that rather than being barriers to human progress, I think they're an absolutely necessary ingredient in human emancipation. But that reflects my own believer orientation, which is not widespread, as you well know, among my colleagues in university.
Last question, go ahead.
I would like to start with a particular that I have the first thing I would like to challenge the concept that says the Islamists are from the engineering and structural sphere. Because if I see the leaders of the Islamists, among them Abdullah al-Mawjud, the founder of the Jama'at Islamiyah, was a journalist, Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the...
But I cited them. Yeah.
The founder of the Ikhwan Muslimin was a teacher, and most of his followers were lawyers and journalists. Now, Hassan al-Turabi, the leader of the Islamic Sudan, is a Western-educated lawyer. Rashid al-Ghanouchi from Tunisia, the Western-educated philosopher. So, at last, the question I would like to ask is, can those people decide to reject the Western way of ruling and try to rule Islamically? That's my question. And also, most of these scholars, not only Professor Ziegler, when they are talking about the Islamists, they refer non-Muslims or secular Muslims. Why don't they refer the books of these people? These people can tell us what they have and what they want to have.
Well, let me take up your first point, because I probably went over that too quickly. I did not say that the leadership in the Islamist sense was not fully part of an understanding of Muslim theology, and you cited very much the top figures. I'm talking about in the rank and file on the nature of the sophistication of whether they even understand what the leaders are saying. Let me give you a dramatic example upon which we've clashed before. Sayyid Qutb is all in favor of the equality of women in full participation. So where in his followers do they ever bring that up? And so I'm saying there's a degree of selectiveness that takes place in the rank and file which is not fully even honest to the sophistication of the leadership. Because after all, the challenge of understanding Islam is a lifetime work, not just a set of slogans.
Okay, I see a hand there that needs to ask a question, so go ahead.
It's not really a question about political Islam. It's more about, I don't know, briefly outlined to us. You mentioned the Israeli media talking about secret peace talks. Just wondering if you have any idea about what's going to happen with the refugee issue in the Middle East and those secret peace talks.
Yeah, no, here we are. I mean, you started this. What happened is there were 20 secret meetings led by Yossi Beilin on the one hand and by Abu Mazen on the other. They brought back in the two Israeli maverick professors who had created Oslo I and got sidelined, as you know, but they met 20 times in Norway, in the Netherlands, in Britain, according to the fully leaked story in Haaretz on the 23rd of February. And of course, the reason it got leaked was someone's opposed to this and wanted to embarrass the Peres government by saying Netanyahu immediately the next day said, "Don't elect this guy, he's going to give up Jerusalem." You see, that was what that all came to. There were 3 stories in the Israeli press, and it's quite clear that the details are real. The way it was reported, of course, was that that Peres was so furious with Beilin over this that he totally dismissed the plan. And then it was said, well, that Arafat had also dismissed it. But it was clearly, in an election campaign, all of this was deeply embarrassing to show how far the Israeli government, you can't believe that Beilin did 20 secret meetings and didn't keep Peres informed of everything he was doing. On the refugee question, the way it reads is that Israel accepts the right of return or compensation and will work with the international community to provide the means of compensation. I mean, that's a huge concession. Now, what it means in practice may be something very different. But I was stunned by that one getting in there because the prevailing view is that they'll entirely finesse. The Israelis publicly have entirely finessed this. But even having said that, look, a secret document, which is the Israeli negotiating position from these talks, was written by Shlomo Gazit, former general in command of the occupied territories, who was given the responsibility for writing the position paper. He goes very far. That's been leaked as well. And he says that we can't keep up this posture of refusing to deal with the refugee question. That's a totally unacceptable position. We better get off it in a hurry. Compensation is a critical element, and what he proposed was taking the $7 billion which Israel has demanded from the former East Germany as reparations would then be given to the Palestinians as compensation. I tried it out of the German ambassador, and he thought maybe there would be a better formula than that. But it simply suggests that we've got to continue to monitor this stuff. There is a great deal more movement and discussion. And I found, even in this visit, I found even in the Arab and Palestinian community, nobody read that Haaretz story. They were stunned when I started talking about it. And there's a clue in all of this, you know. If you don't read the Hebrew press, you can't really find out much that's going on in the Middle East.
Okay, last question.
I'd like to ask a question that you already sort of mentioned, and that is regarding Saudi Arabia. What do you think is the prevalence of the Saudi royal regime versus the Muslim Brotherhood, and more specifically the Shiites in Saudi Arabia in relation to them?
Interestingly enough, the threat that I'm talking about is really not coming from the Shia, which of course was the earlier unrest, as you know, at the time of the mosque incident and this, so that remains a serious flaw. In the Bahraini community may be something that's going to blow up very, very immediately, precisely in that element. But even then, there's a strong Sunni opposition. And in the Saudi case, it's a Sunni very much you could describe as Islamist. The man the physicist in London who runs this organization, remember that the British were going to try and deport, and then that was prevented. This Committee on
Defense of Legitimate Rights.
Defense of Legitimate Rights. It's wonderful the titles one plays with us. He's the son of one of the leading Saudi sheikhs. But he also is a nuclear physicist who was hired to develop a Saudi nuclear weapons program, which they decided not to go ahead with. I mean, the details of what's going, I mean, this is not some casual little human rights activist sitting in London. This is an enormously important person, and he has a huge audience inside Saudi Arabia, because the response to the attitude toward corruption is now very, very publicly said at every turn. And of course, one's going through a deep financial crisis. It cost the Saudis $55 billion for Desert Storm. The United States continues to collect at every turn for its military buildup. You had $30 billion worth of weapons. The Americans are digging their grave on this, because the business of buying off everyone is now disappearing. The Saudis have not paid their creditors for about the last 6 months on all kinds of bills. This myth that, you know, there's this tremendous wealth in the Gulf made sense before the fall in oil prices and Desert Storm. I mean, we're dealing with a very serious change in the situation, and we have a serious opposition abroad. So I think the situation is much more vulnerable. My view on this is shared by people who know a lot more about Saudi Arabia than I do. And from the American point of view, they don't seem to get it. They're playing Iran all over again. You build up all the military threat, and you put all these American soldiers in Saudi Arabia and the build-up, and then you say you're defending their security. But in point of fact, you're undermining their internal legitimacy. That's what happened in Iran. And you'd think they'd learn a lesson from this, but they don't seem to at all. And to show you how far this delegitimizing has gone, again, January 21st, I'm reading Haaretz. Zev Schiff, the leading defense correspondent, just made a trip to Kuwait. And he interviews the National Security Advisor to the Emir. And the National Security Advisor tells him that if you'll just go ahead and make a deal with Syria, we're prepared to move ahead very quickly here in the Gulf. We've discussed it a lot in the GCC, that we will put, our security is now severely threatened by the situation in the Gulf, and we plan to put ourselves under the Israeli nuclear umbrella because it's more reliable than the Americans. I mean, if this is the legacy of Desert Storm, how much legitimacy do you think can survive in those Gulf states with ideas that are put forward like this? I mean, that's why I'm saying I think the situation is increasingly very turbulent.
I'm Mark Bruzonsky, your host for this weekly program, Mideast Realities, and thank you for watching. If you too are concerned about the situation in today's Middle East and about U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world, and if you'd like to meet like-minded persons, why don't you come to one of our weekly social meetings? I'll be there, of course. Just give us a call for details.